here with a very exciting day in Flesh and Blood history. It's FAB 2.0, 12th of April 2022, and we've just had this massive announcement from LSS, which we've got up here on the screen. So I thought what it might be useful to do is go through the announcement, what my initial thoughts and takeaways are, and the main things that I'm excited about, and some of the things, basically in summary, that you would want to know if you didn't have time to read the article in full. I'm also going to take a quick look at what I think is a really interesting sort of part spoiler in this, but we'll come to that in a moment, and we'll look at whether we can glean any information about the next set, other than, of course, the fact that it's called Uprising, and that it's releasing on June 24, which is announced later on in the announcement today. But basically, the summary of FAB 2.0 is that it covers the distribution model for FAB, so what comes in the booster boxes. There's an announcement of non-English cards. There's an announcement of a new type of set, white bordered set for FAB, the history packs, which we're going to go through in a bit more detail as well. And then there's some changes to organized play, as well as some announcements around PvE. So as this announcement here says, FAB 2.0 is not about changing the game system itself. So it's not a new rule system. It's not a huge change to the game in terms of when you sit down and play against your opponent. But what it is a really big change to is how the game is distributed and how you acquire your cards. So as we can see, it talks about the mission of LSS, bringing players together in the flesh and blood through the common language of playing great games. And one of the things that's really emphasized in this announcement is the playing aspect. As you can see here, because our mission centers around playing the game, it therefore goes without saying we need fans to be able to obtain cards on release day to play the game. And how LSS is going to facilitate that is they're going to get rid of the unlimited and first edition split, and they're instead going to, with Uprising, the new set releasing on June 24, simply have one product called the Uprising Booster Box. My thoughts on this are I'm super excited. I think this is exactly the right way to go. You can see in the paragraph above, LSS answers the question, why not just release first edition and unlimited on the same day? And I know that there were some people in the community who were saying we should have first edition and unlimited. First edition should be a more limited run, like far smaller than it was for Tales or Monarch or Everfest. And then players who want cold foils can get them from that really limited run, and then everybody else can have unlimited. Now, I'm really glad that LSS went with this new model instead, which we'll come to in more detail in a moment, as to how you get your cold foils. But the basics of it are that every Uprising booster box, and for future sets, is going to have the chance of getting cold foils, but they will also have rainbow foils. So all the legendaries will appear, and all the fables will appear in both rainbow foil and cold foil, but cold foils will be around, as they say here, 3 times rarer than they have historically been in a first edition booster pack. This, along with some other changes, including here in this following paragraph, that there's a change to the booster pack configuration. So the cold foils now come in the token slot. And basically, if you're drafting with Uprising or any future set, you just get to keep the cold foil if you open one, to get rid of those kind of feel bad moments where do you draft the good card for your deck in pack 3 or do you draft the cold foil that's worth money? So I'm really excited about this versus the idea of having a really limited first edition print run, because I don't want us to go back to the days where people who are in the know with their stores or people who have access to really limited products are able to get the money cards, and everybody else just has to make do with things that are lower value and has no shot at getting those money cards. I think that's a bad system. I think it breeds bad cultures. I think it doesn't reward players. And as I'm not going to read all the text in the article out to you, but one of the things that James White notes in the article is that we want every player to have a chance of having that moment when they open the booster pack in a draft or in whatever else, just, opening packs to fill out their collection, they hit that fabled cold foil, and it's just that oh wow moment. You don't want that to be restricted just to enfranchised players or just to players who are lucky enough to know their store and are well enough to get some tiny allocation of first edition product or some share of that tiny allocation. And everybody else, including, younger players or newer players who are just joining the game, has to make do with unlimited. Instead, what we've got here is a model where collectors are served by the fact that cold foils are going to be rarer. The value of cold foils is going to be maintained because they will be a lot rarer than the rainbow foil versions that you're still going to be able to get in these packs. but everybody will have a chance at getting them, albeit a smaller chance. So I think it's a really great compromise between trying to retain the value, the scarcity, the excitement around cold foils, but also making sure everybody has a chance at getting them. So how's LSS going to do that? They've published average pull rates for Uprising, which are going to be, as always, unknown for Fableds, Cold Foil and Rainbow Foil. But if we work backwards from the bottom, then we kind of get a good idea of what that might look like. So Legendary Cold Foils are going to be 1 per 220 packs. That's approximately 1 per just over 9 boxes. What that means is that players are going to find it much harder to get a Legendary Cold Foil. So they're going to be appearing just over once every 2 cases. So if you buy 2 cases, you're no longer going to be... Previously, you would have been very likely to get around 2 Legendary Cold Foils, around 1 per case. Now, you're going to get from 2 cases just under an average of 1. So they're going to be about twice or slightly rarer than slightly more than twice as rare as what they were before, Legendary Cold Foil specifically. Rainbow foil legendaries are going to be 1 per 80 packs. So that's around that 1 per case ratio that we're used to. So what you're going to see is that when you open up a case, you're still going to get your legendary that you would normally have gotten in a previous set, but it's going to be rainbow foil. But you're going to have a shot, maybe a 1 in just over 2 shot at getting a legendary cold foil as well. So these legendary cold foils for Uprising boosters are going to be like, you're kind of buying this amalgam first edition unlimited product. It's like you're buying an unlimited product previously, but in terms of value and expected value from the box, in terms of number of legendaries, but you also have this extra chance of getting a cold foil legendary as well. So I don't know if that makes sense, but you're still as likely to get the essential game pieces as you were before, because if you use a rainbow foil or a cold foil legendary for your hero, it doesn't make a difference functionally in the game. But you've also got this additional chance, which is not that remote. You know, it's in a case, if you buy a case, you've got just under a 1 in 2 chance of hitting one, and that is a legendary cold foil as well as the game piece cold foil in the rainbow foil version. So the game piece legendary being the rainbow foil one. So I think it's a really great compromise. It's a really great way of getting more legendaries into people's hands as well. That's one of the things that can't be overlooked in this, in that for every 2 and a bit cases you buy, there's going to be an extra legendary on top of what they would have used to have been. So that's worth noting. That means over the whole game population and over the whole community, there will be more legendaries being opened, which will hopefully ever so slightly bring down the price of those rainbow foils. But you're going to have this increased disparity where rainbow foils are going to be clearly less rare than legendaries of exactly the same card. And that's going to really make clearer that legendary cold foils are the higher value, scarcer versions. And this fixes a lot of the issues that LSS had been facing. One of the main issues was that how much first edition do you print? Because you want to get it into players' hands early. You want to give people a chance of getting these cold foils. So as we saw with the Monarch print run announcement, LSS printed 125,000 boxes. That's a lot of boxes, but they wanted to get them into everybody's hands. Fair enough. You know, I think it was the right amount for Monarch. But then they have to print unlimited as well. And in order to make unlimited rainbow foil legendaries less rare than cold foil legendaries, you've got to print more than 125,000 unlimited boxes. And as the sets go on, as we get to Aria, Everfest, and now Uprising, if they'd continued with that model for Uprising, they have to estimate for a growing player base, how much first edition do they want to get into people's hands? How much do they have to print in order to give everyone a shot at getting some? And then they need to print more than that in unlimited in order to retain that scarcity of cold foils, in order to retain the correct ratio of rainbow foils to cold foils, lest rainbow foils become more rare. So I think this is a great way, by combining them into the one pack, not only do they give everybody the chance to access these, but they also maintain control over the ratio of rainbow foil legendaries to cold foil legendaries that are out there in the wild, without having to double tap stores to sell a first edition and an unlimited box, and print so many unlimited boxes that it's hard for those stores to keep shifting them. And I think LSS has listened to retailer feedback in that regard. And I think this change, putting them in the one pack, maintaining control or taking back control over the ratios, so that every additional booster box they print is actually going to not warp, but instead maintain that ratio of rainbow foil to cold foils. I think it's really good. In terms of other cards in the pack and the other stats they've got here, we can see that Majestics are 1 per 4 packs, which is about the same. Rares 1.75 per pack, so you're going to get 2 rare or higher in each pack. You're going to get 11 commons, and interestingly now you're going to get 2 tokens per pack. So there's 47 tokens and 1 cold foil per 24 packs. So in your 24 pack average box, there's going to be 48 token all cold foil cards, so that's 2 per pack. One of the cards in the whole 24 packs is going to be a cold foil, but there'll be 2 token / cold foil cards in each pack. Rainbow foils will still be 1 per pack, and there'll be 16 cards per pack. That's because we've now got that extra token. That's going to be the main change. In terms of the cold foil reprint policy, they've said that this is going to remain the same. So once they've printed cold foils in no longer first edition, but in a product, they're not going to reprint those cold foils later. And that's going to be important when we come to the next part of the announcement around the history packs. Basically, you're never going to see history packs reprinting cold foils. They're making that promise. They haven't stated in this section how much of each set they're going to print. So they're not obviously not going to give us numbers, but they're also not saying the first wave or the amount that gets printed and then allocated to stores is going to be it. They're not making any of those promises. So they're giving themselves the flexibility to print what would have been a first print run or a first edition print run, and then have another print run as well if the product's doing well. And that's fine. That makes sense to me as well. It does mean that there might be, over the product life cycle of each set, there might be more printings and therefore more cold foils coming out whilst that set's on the shelves. But I think they're still going to follow, I mean, they haven't announced it here that they will, but I think they will still follow that model of sets going out of print. And then once that's done, it's done. And unless they reprint that set wholesale, they won't reprint cold foils. Although it does leave the door open for that. And it's worth noting that. So they say, starting from Uprising, for example, cold foils that appear in Uprising will only ever appear in Uprising. But they don't say that Uprising is limited edition. So they leave themselves open, they leave the door open for themselves to print Uprising in June 2022 and then have, a life cycle of a year or whatever they want. And then in 2025, they could come back and print Uprising again. I don't think they will do that, but this announcement kind of leaves the door open for that. Before I move on to history packs, I do want to discuss this little teaser that they've got here. So there's a new rarity, which isn't included on the rarity table here. And that is this purple triangle, or as James likes to think of it, a half diamond, which is Marvels. And these are going to be things like the Alt Art Channel Lake Frigid, the Alt Art or the Extended Art Herald of Erudition and Mark of the Beast and Luminar Ascension from Monarch. And the frequency of each Marvel card will vary. So they say some of them are equivalent to past alts, such as Earthlaw Bounty, and some are harder to find, like the Herald of Erudition and the Either Wildfire extended arts. All cards with the Marvel rarity symbol are much rarer than a normal foil version of their base rarity would be. So these are not unique new cards, they're just alternate versions of cards in booster packs, which is kind of cool. I like that they've designated a new rarity for these cards, because they are cards that collectors like to chase and look at and gather, and so having a little extra distinguishing feature on the card in the rarity symbol, I think is really cool. There is something that I wanted to discuss on these though, so I'll see if we can get up. So as you can see here, this is a blown up version of what was in the FAB 2.0 announcement as the bottom of one of these new Marvel cards. So I'll take you back to the original. There we are. So that's the original. I've just copied that out and I've blown it up a little bit. So this, we don't know what class it is. They've deliberately deleted the text here. But what I've done is I've gone and grabbed the same portion of a range of different cards to see if we can figure out either what this is definitively or what it might be. So I grabbed a few examples first. So we've got kind of Guardian. It's very clearly not Guardian or a base Guardian card. We can see the border's quite different. grabbed Brute. You know, Brute's got this kind of gold hue to it, so it's not, or bronze hue if you like, so it's definitely not a Brute card, not a base Brute card. Ranger, similarly, it's got this kind of silver look. The Ranger card does have this black border around the circle on either side, which is similar to the way this the new card works, the new Marvel. But the new Marvel has this uninterrupted black line here, whereas the Ranger card, there is an interruption where the silver meets the silver. So it doesn't look like a base Ranger card. Also, you can see the kind of purpley hue on the Marvel that's not replicated on the Ranger one. So I thought, which cards have a bit more of a purpley hue generally? Runeblade cards. But as you can see, the bottom of the base Runeblade border is actually quite silver. It doesn't have any of a purple hue at all. All right, I thought, well, how about Shadow? The Shadow cards all have a purple hue. So we've got Shadow Brute here. You can see that it's very similar to the base Brute border, but it does have a couple of things. It's got sort of a little extra twist that looks a little bit like a tendon and connects up to the rest of the Brute, the Shadow Brute border that does have this sort of tendon texture on it. So that's very clearly different, I think, to what we've got here. Although it is a little bit fuzzy on the actual corners of the card, of the new Marvel, so it is a little bit difficult to tell, but it doesn't quite look like the Shadow Brute border. And the coloring is slightly different. It's a little more purple on the Shadow Brute card, so I don't think it's that. So I thought, how about Shadow Runeblade? So Shadow Runeblade, as we can see, it has, again, this little black gap between the circle and the border, but it's not contiguous. It doesn't go all the way around, whereas the Marvel one does. And we haven't got a purplish hue at all, which was actually quite surprising to me because the card itself obviously does, but we've got more of a blacky silver sort of hue to this. So I thought, what about Illusionist? Illusionist cards, the base Illusionist cards are quite purple, and they're far too purple. One of the interesting things about this, though, is the Illusionist card does have the contiguous line around between the circle and the border, and that's the first one we've seen that does have that. So that's the only other example that I could find that has that contiguous line, and it's also got a couple of other similarities. So one is the actual shading. You can see that on these circles on either side of the border, they each have a slightly different area where the light hits them. I mean, it's broadly similar on many of them, but on some of the earlier ones and some of the later ones, you'll see it's actually quite different. Whereas with the exception of being a little darker in general, the new Marvel is actually the way the light hits it is actually quite similar to the way the light hits the Illusionist border. And it's even more pronounced across this little intersection here, this three-way intersection at the bottom of the middle of the border. You can see the light hits that in a broadly similar way to the new Marvel, although the new Marvel is more muted again and darker. So I think there are some definite similarities with the Illusionist border, although obviously it's not base Illusionist and the color is quite different. So I got thinking maybe it's a Shadow Illusionist, that's possible. So I thought I'd just have a look at the base Shadow border. And as you can see, it's not a base Shadow card. That the base Shadow card has these extra little flares on them, but they also do have this contiguous black area between the circle and the border. So I think, and they've got the sort of purplish hue. So the last one I wanted to check was the Shadow Token. It's for the Shadow Token cards. So this was for the Demon Allies. And we can again see a lot of similarities. There's a contiguous black line, but it's a little bit hard to see at this resolution, but these Demon Ally cards have almost a sort of concrete-y texture to the border. So it's definitely not a Shadow Token or a base Shadow Token. And then actually the last one I wanted to check was how about Wizard? Because Wizard does have this sort of bluish hue as well. The Wizard cards are a little different. They don't have the black space between the circle and the border, but they do have a sort of similar light pattern as well as a similar purpley bluey hue. So if I was to guess, I think the two most likely options are a Shadow Wizard or a Shadow Illusionist. Just going back to that. I think Illusionist to me looks like the most similar border in terms of light and positioning and everything else. But the Wizard border also has similarities in terms of tone, the tone of the blue compared to the blue on that, or the purple on the new border. So anyway, that's my investigative work. Chime in the comments if you've got your own thoughts about what it is, but it's kind of a little teaser that LSS chucked into the article. And if I had to guess today, I would guess Shadow Illusionist or Shadow Wizard. But anyway, let's get back to the article. Oh, that's me. What's me? There we go. Whew. All right. So aside from that possible little spoiler, LSS also announced history packs, which are brand new reprint sets. And this is probably, in many ways, the second biggest part of the announcement. I think first edition Unlimited being gone is the biggest part of the announcement in terms of what affects most players, because that's how most of us get the cards. That's how most of us access the cards that we want to play the game. The history packs affect us indirectly because they'll probably affect secondary market prices of cards. But for those of us who are going to acquire going forward most of our cards from the base sets themselves, the history packs aren't such a big deal. But what they are amazing for and really important for is bringing new players into the game who haven't already got established collections. So this is the way that you can quickly get a new player up to speed with the expensive, important, staple cards to go to tournaments without them having to go back and buy cases and boxes of all the existing sets. And it's a way to prevent Command and Conquers, Tunics, potentially the other legendaries, things like Mask of Momentum, from becoming so scarce that the prices go up, and then the barrier to entry is even bigger for new players. And that's one of the banes of any game's growth, is if it gets too expensive for new players to join, then you're never going to be able to attract them, and the game just kind of gets so bloated in price and expense that it just sort of falls over and dies. So history packs, I think, are a really, really, really important way to stop that from happening, and I'm super glad that LSS has announced them. Obviously, on the flip side of that, you've got Chronicles from Magic the Gathering as a warning to game designers that if you devalue collectors' existing cards too much, even using white borders, even using different expansion symbols, then that can be a terrible thing for the game. It can cause a crisis of confidence if you're not clear about the method and how you're going about doing it and how you're protecting the value of collectors' and cards. And if you're not upfront about the extent to which you're doing it. So what LSS has attempted to do in this announcement is give us some clarity about how they're going to do it. So firstly, they're releasing these black label versions, which are very similar to the foreign black border versions of early Magic the Gathering. So this is the first printing in French, German, Italian, and Spanish of Flesh and Blood cards. They will be black bordered, they will be very limited print run, and they will feature some kind of additional special feature that hasn't yet been announced. So it could be, Cold Foil Command and Conquers, or alternate art in Light and Strikes, or something like that. Or, some kind of full bleed card. Who knows? But there will be some extra little thank you and token of LSS's appreciation to all of those people in French, German, Italian, and Spanish-speaking countries who purchase these black label products. But for everyone else, it'll be these English and in the other languages, just this sort of pack here that doesn't have the deluxe version. It'll just be this base version without that tag. And that's what the white bordered history packs will look like. So what will they have in them? They'll be releasing on the 6th of May, and the black label limited print run versions will release on the 1st of July. They've been really clear, importantly, there's a few things I want to say about history pack. They've been really clear, importantly, that it's going to be once every 2 years that they're going to release one of these. So this is the first one, and it'll cover Welcome to Wraith, Arcane Rising, and Crucible of War, and it'll be a great way for new players to get access to the staple cards from those sets. Excellent. History Pack 2 will follow soon after History Pack 1 in those other languages, French, German, Italian, and Spanish, so it'll probably be released later this year. But the English version of History Pack 2, which will cover Monarch, Talzavari, and Everfest, won't release until 2024. So that'll give a lot of time for the existing stock of black bordered English cards to get bought up and distributed out to players into their collections. And then by the time 2024 rolls around, we'll hopefully, if the game keeps growing, have a whole lot of new players who want to acquire those Monarch cards. They want to get a copy of their Luminaris or Nourishing Emptiness or Exude Confidence. And it's really hard to come by because all those Monarch packs have been sold out now for, a year or so, and they're not on the shelves anymore. So instead, those people will be able to buy History Pack 2. History Pack 2, like History Pack 1, will be white border. And it's important that LSS has also been upfront about what's going to be in the packs, which is kind of cool. So, we're obviously going to see them opened in about a month or so, or less than a month now, coming out at the start of May. And what's in the pack, there's going to be 427 cards in the set. There's going to be 10 cards per pack, so they're like supplemental set packs. They're not going to be draftable, which, it is kind of annoying in a way because it means that the only people who are going to buy them are going to be stores who are opening them to, sell singles, or new players who are looking for a sort of quicker and slightly cheaper way to get into the game or get access to these older cards. It not being draftable is not the end of the world, but it probably would have been nice to have some kind of draftable format. Although I acknowledge that when you're doing a reprint set like this, you just want to be able to reprint the cards and not have to design like a balanced draft format. So like maybe the draft format with all these different cards, you've got a few wizard cards here and there and then not enough arcane barrier, would not be a fun draft format. Maybe it would have taken too much effort for LSS to curate a fun and balanced draft format. Totally fair enough. But still, it does feel unfortunate to have such large booster boxes and large runs of cards that aren't playable in limited. But that's kind of by the by. So 36 packs per display, up from the usual 24. 4 displays per case, just like the usual cases. There are 9 legendaries, interestingly. So in the first 2 sets, in Arcane Rising and Welcome to Wraith, we had the Tunic and then the 4 class legendaries. So 5 legendaries in Welcome to Wraith. And then we had the Skullcap and then the 4 class legendaries in Arcane Rising. So 10 legendaries altogether in those first 2 sets. And then we had Shyana as well in Crucible of War. So it seems like out of those 11 legendaries in the first block, 2 of them are going to be missing. Is it going to be a white-bordered Shyana reprint and no Skullcap or Tunic? Well, that's not going to be it because we've got Tunic here on the front page. So is it going to be a Tunic reprint but no Skullcap and no Shyana? Or are we going to see some of the class legendaries missed out? For instance, has LSS decided that nobody wants a white-bordered Skullburn Crosswrap, so they're just not going to reprint Skullburn Crosswrap? That's entirely possible. I think that would kind of probably be the best outcome. Some of those lower-powered legendaries, if they just left out, for instance, it's hard to say Scabbies because Scab skins are probably a lot higher on the power curve than Skullburn Crosswrap, but if you left out, for argument's sake, Scab Skin Leathers and Skullburn Crosswrap, I think it would be kind of cool. But I think Shyana, if you're designing a reprint set that's around playing the game, Shyana's a bit more of a gimmick and a bit more of a kind of collector card. So I'd be happiest, I think, if they left out Shyana and Skullburn Crosswrap, because all the others are quite playable. They might leave out Skullcap since they have just reprinted it in Everfest, but then they reprinted Tunic in Crucible of War. So who knows? I guess the countervailing argument to that is that Everfest had a much larger print run than Crucible of War, so it probably makes the most sense for Skullcap not to be in this reprint set. Long-winded way of saying there are 2 legendaries missing. We don't know which ones yet, except we know that Tunic's in the set. There are 62 Majestics, 118 Rares, and 238 Commons. And we saw on the announcement page that some of the Super Rares, for instance, Become the Arknight, are going to be upgraded to Majestics. It may be that all the Super Rares that they reprint get upgraded to Majestics, but I think there will also definitely be some Super Rares that aren't reprinted in the set. That would make a lot of sense. 118 Rares, 238 Commons, and the distribution in each pack will be 8 Commons per pack, 1 Rare and 1 Rare or higher. So just the usual rarity distribution. And MSRP per pack is $5.50 Australian, $3.89 USD, and $5.49 New Zealand dollars, just for example's sake. Which, just to compare for us, we tend to pay $150 for base sets and around between $110 and $120 for supplemental sets. So $199.90, basically $200, is more expensive than an ordinary booster box of, you know, first edition Tales or a new booster box of Uprising is going to be for us. There are 36 packs here, so you're getting 50% more packs, but you're getting no foils and you're getting white bordered cards. So a few people have mentioned the price point. I'm not sure it's exactly right, and some of it will depend on the actual drop rates and the pull rates of the cards. I think what would sort of make the most sense for newer players coming into the game is if the legendaries were 1 per 36 packs in this set. So if the legendaries, white border legendaries, were a bit more common, and approximately once per booster box you get a legendary, that would kind of make sense. Say you got like 1 legendary and how many majestics? So we've got 36 packs. Say they were 1 per 5 packs or thereabouts. I mean, in main sets they're 1 per 4 packs, but if you said they're 1 per 5 in these, then you're looking at, what's that, around 7 majestics in a box. Is that right? 6, 7, yeah, just over 7 majestics in a box, and 1 legendary. That sounds about right. Like for $199 Australian or $140 US, if you got 1 legendary and 7 majestics, some of which are going to be super rare upgrades, things like Become the Arknight that are like $2 cards, then to me that would sound like maybe decent value for newer players. But if the legendaries are rarer than 1 per 36 packs, then it kind of becomes a bit hard to see how these are going to sell. Like, how are you going to convince a new player that getting white bordered versions of some of these cards at that high price point is kind of worth it? I mean, you know, maybe that will help to prop up the secondary market value of the existing black bordered versions. And maybe with the amount that this is printed, it's attempting to maintain the current market value of a lot of the cards without seeing them increase much beyond where they are now. You know, perhaps things like Command and Conquer and some of the outliers will come down a tiny bit. But yeah, a lot of it will depend on the drop rates. But if it is around 1 per 36 packs legendary and 1 per 4 to 5 packs majestic, then I don't see the value of a lot of these cards going down significantly, because the price point is actually quite high per box here. So that's history packs. I think it's a great way to maintain the longevity of the game without damaging existing collectors too much and existing players. And one other thing I wanted to mention on Chronicles, just because I did mention that comparison with the Magic Set Chronicles, which those of you who don't know can sort of look that up on Wikipedia or something else. I'm sure someone can put a link in the comments. There's been a lot written about Chronicles and the things that went wrong there from Wizards' perspective. But basically what they did was print some cards from the base, you know, Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Revised set, some cards from the first couple of expansions, Arabian Nights, Antiquities, etc., all with white border, and the expansion cards had the expansion symbol on them as well, but it was white border to differentiate it. It was overprinted, and crucially, I think the biggest mistake that Wizards made with Chronicles was that it didn't have the power cards in it. You know, they took out all the Power 9, Dual Lands, everything that was important from the base set of the game, everything that was powerful. So people who purchased Chronicles were sort of buying these packs that didn't actually have the best cards in them. You know, they didn't even have the best cards from the expansions in them. And that led to these like massively overprinted, really low value packs, because there was no way, if they reprinted things like, you know, Ancestral Recall or whatever else in Chronicles, it wasn't going to be able to be differentiated from Unlimited, because Unlimited was white border and didn't have an expansion symbol. So it was just going to, you know, they couldn't just keep reprinting the same things over and over again in white border. What LSS has carefully done and allowed themselves with this product is they've got plenty of other differentiations beyond just the border. So they've got black border to white border is one thing, but then they've also got foil and non-foil. You know, nothing in this set is going to be foil. The existing legendaries are all foil or rainbow foil or cold foil, other than those that are, you know, the Krunic and the Dull Cap. Players are going to know that those black bordered cards and the existing foils and all those other differentiators are there to keep the value of their existing collections and their existing cards higher. But importantly, for the players who are buying this product, they're going to be actually getting the power cards as well. So they're getting Tunic, you know, the best equipment in the game. They're getting Command and Conquer, some of the best generic Majestics in the game, hopefully Enlightened Strike as well. And by doing that, I think LSS has designed something that's going to serve existing players well, and serve the new players who are buying this well, and it'll differentiate it hopefully from the trajectory of Chronicles. So the second part of the FAB 2.0 announcement, I know there was a lot there, and I'll skip through the rest of it a little bit more quickly, but this is around a bit more casual or social play, which is great. So they've got classic battles, this Rhinar and Dorinthia dual deck that's coming out soon as the first example of first play and social play experiences coming out of different products other than booster boxes. They've talked about player versus environment again, which is something that a lot of players are super excited about. A flagship social play product that's going to see players band together in campaign settings that can be as long or as short as your party wants. So that's really cool. You know, you can have multiple players taking on some kind of role-playing dungeon boss, that sort of thing. And hopefully, if LSS, it sounds like they're putting the resources into developing something that will actually be able to be played a bit more as a campaign. And you can bring your deck and your hero and, you know, your cool equipment and all these great things that you've been collecting, and you can get them out with your friends on the table and, you know, slay some giant monsters together. And I think that's an experience that a lot of people have been looking for from Flesh and Blood. The game is so well suited to having that sort of thing in it that I think this will go a long way to making a lot of players really happy and help grow the game as well. Reformatting casual play formats, so Ultimate Pit Fight and Commoner. A couple of announcements there, including that this suggested Commoner rules, or rather official Commoner rules now, you can only include rare and common young heroes. So the majestic young heroes like Icelander will be not legal. You get your 11 inventory slots like in Blitz, up to 2 rares, and everything else can be common. So you can play two one-handed rare equipment, for example, one-handed rare weapons, I should say, and you can have 2 rare equipment, but everything else must be common. You can have a 40-card deck of only common cards and up to 2 copies of each unique card allowed, just like in Blitz. And there will be an independent banned and restricted or banned and suspended list now, which is another change we'll come to, for the Commoner format. So that's pretty cool. They've kind of got this new Blitz format, which is Commoner, so commons only, which could be a really cool way to get new players in if you ran some Commoner armories, for example. They're also reviewing rules enforcement, so there'll be a new competitive rules enforcement level. Or they're looking at having a third type of rules enforcement level to go in the middle, which I think would be really cool. ELO changes. A lot of people have noticed that it's really hard to get ELO rating. You know, I've been playing FAB for around a year now, and I've been to heaps and heaps, 100 or so events, and only one ELO rated event. Even though I've played Road to Nationals, I've played ProQuest, I'm going to go to the Pro Tour soon, which is going to be ELO rated, but it would be good if a few of those other things in between were also ELO rated. So crucially, they're now including Battle Hardened and Road to Nationals and ProQuest as ELO rated events, which is really cool. There will be a different K factor, so a different impact on your ELO rating depending on whether you're playing, you know, Pro Tour and World Championship at the higher end or Road to Nationals and ProQuest at the lower end, in terms of how much your rating will fluctuate when you play in those events. Makes heaps of sense. I think it's a really good quality of life change, and well done LSS on that. They're getting rid of the restricted list and they're changing it to a suspended list, which will be a temporary or time-gated banning. So there's some examples they've given. Something's suspended until the next banned and suspended announcement, until a particular date, or until a particular hero becomes a living legend. It's a great idea, gives them more flexibility, gives more clarity to people about when things are going to be temporarily removed from the game as opposed to being permanently removed for being fundamentally unbalanced. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This element has been a little more controversial, and that is the removal of weapons as part of Living Legend process. So they've got a list here of every hero currently in the game and their weapon, or their signature weapon. So they've said, it's important to us the heroes of Wraith are bound to their signature weapons, and this is reflected through the game system to honour and strengthen the crossover between the game and the world of Wraith. So when a hero becomes a living legend, they take their signature weapon with them too, meaning that it's not available to them or anyone else. they've noted that the young heroes here are separate. So for instance, when Dorinthia, as opposed to Dorinthia Ironsong, is living legended out of Blitz, Dawnblade will no longer be legal in Blitz, but presumably Dorinthia Ironsong and other warrior heroes will continue to be able to play Dawnblade in Classic Constructed until Dorinthia Ironsong becomes a living legend. Makes sense. I don't mind this change. I think it's flavorful. I think it leads to change and turnover in the game at an appropriate pace. And yeah, I think a bit of change here and there is not a problem, and losing some of these cards, even though we love them and we develop a sentimental attachment to them, is probably the right way to go. And it's nice to see Rosetta Thorn on that list as one that will eventually go, because it's pretty overpowered. Legendary and Beyond. So they've announced that there will be a Living Legend format, which is really cool, because again, it means that once something Living Legends, we don't just see a rush of everybody wanting to try and sell it, and all its associated weapons and equipment. There is actually some use to holding those cards in your collection, and something beyond sentimentality that might allow you to play them in the future. So that's really cool. I think having that kind of format is an excellent idea. Seasonal programs. So this is just another little quality of life tweak that's really smart. A lot of people have suggested this to LSS, which is to say you've got an increasing number of events, and if you have each category of events, for instance, Pro Quest or Pro Tour or World Championship, worth a fixed number of Living Legend points, then as there are more events added to the calendar, there will be more points up for grabs each season, and heroes will Living Legend faster. I think the current pace of Living Legend is about right. We don't want it to get faster. Otherwise, we'll start losing heroes too quickly, and we'll have a game with, just Azalea and Kano left in Classic Constructed. We don't want that. So I think what they've said is that they're going to apportion Living Legend points at the start of each competitive season, for instance, a Pro Quest season, according to how many events there are being run in that season. So they can control a little bit more carefully how many points are up for grabs each season. Makes complete sense. Great change. So that brings us to the end of the announcement today. I guess in summary, there are a few main takeaway points. One is retiring First Edition and making First Edition Unlimited combined into simply the new releases. Uprising on June 24 will just be an Uprising booster box. Love it, makes great sense. Drop rates of cold foils are going to be lower, and you will have cold foils and rainbow foils in these booster packs. Love it, excellent. Gets cards into players' hands and keeps collectability. We've got that cheeky little spoiler there, which I think might be a Shadow Illusionist or Shadow Wizard. We'll find out in the next set. Cold foil reprint policy being adapted to work. The new history packs, I think, are a really cool idea. I hope LSS executes it right with the right print runs, the right drop rates. I hope newer players join the game at an appropriate rate to, justify this. But I guess we'll wait and see how it turns out. And it'll be interesting to get one of these whiteboarded cards in my hand and see what they actually look like. The black label versions too for the French, German, Italian, and Spanish communities. Excellent idea. The changes to giving more clarity around what PvE will look like. Super excited for that. Can't wait to sit down on a Friday night with some of the regulars at my local game stores and play some PvE. That'll be fun. More lore, better and official casual play formats. Awesome. New ELO, ban and restricted list, and the living legending of weapons. Cool little ideas, some great quality of life changes, and then, of course, the seasonal gating or controlling of the amount of living legend points up for grabs. Makes a lot of sense to me. So that brings us to the end. I hope you've enjoyed this summary of the FAB 2.0 announcement. Love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear your thoughts on what this little spoiler might be at the new rarity. And if you've got any feedback or anything you'd like to see in future Winning Agenda FAB videos, let me know. Doing lots of Pro Tour testing over the next couple of weeks, trying to get as much info as I can. Currently rocking Viserai and enjoying that in a couple of my local armories, but we'll switch over to a couple of other heroes as well as we come closer. Of course, still got the Starvo deck there in the back pocket in case it's still legal. But otherwise, I'll see you guys soon, hopefully with some deck tests, gameplays, or something else. Catch you around.